In the harsh desert of Afghanistan, where survival depends on split-second decisions and unwavering trust between soldiers, appearances can be deadly deceptive. What happens when a most unlikely person carries the heaviest secrets? Sometimes the smallest details, a colorful rifle, a childhood trinket, reveal the deepest truths about who we really are beneath the uniform. The morning sun blazed mercilessly over Camp Leatherneck as Staff Sergeant Maria Santos adjusted her grip on what had become the most controversial piece of equipment in the entire Marine Corps forward operating base. The rifle slung across her shoulder wasn't standard issue black or military green. It was purple. Not just any purple, but a vibrant, almost electric shade that seemed to glow against the dusty beige landscape of Afghanistan. Maria had grown accustomed to the stares, the whispered comments, and the barely concealed snickers from her fellow Marines. What she hadn't expected was how quickly word would spread through the entire base about the toy soldier with a Barbie gun. The nickname stung more than she cared to admit, especially coming from men she was supposed to trust with her life. As she made her way across the compound toward the armory for her daily weapons inspection, she could feel eyes tracking her movement. The small Christmas tree keychain attached to her gear bag jingled softly with each step, another detail that had become fodder for jokes among the ranks. In a place where everything was regulation olive drab or desert tan, Maria Santos stood out like a neon sign in a library. "Hey, Santos," called out Corporal Jake Mitchell from across the courtyard. "Did you get that rifle from a toy store?" I didn't know Mattel made sniper equipment now. The group of Marines around Mitchell erupted in laughter, their voices carrying across the morning air. Maria kept walking, her jaw set in a firm line. She'd heard worse. Much worse. What bothered her most wasn't the jokes themselves, but the assumption behind them. These men looked at her purple rifle and Christmas keychain and saw weakness. They saw someone who didn't belong, someone who wasn't serious about the mission. If they only knew. Maria reached the armory and began her routine inspection. The rifle might be purple, but every component was meticulously maintained. The scope was perfectly calibrated, the barrel cleaned to military standards, and the action smooth as silk. She'd modified the weapon herself, spending countless hours ensuring it performed better than any standard-issue rifle in the Marines' inventory. Sergeant First Class Robert Hayes approached as she finished her inspection. Hayes was a 20-year veteran with multiple combat deployments and a reputation for being fair but tough. Unlike the younger Marines, he didn't seem amused by Maria's unconventional equipment. "Santos," he said, his voice neutral but carrying authority. "We need to talk." Maria straightened, automatically shifting into attention position. "Yes, Sergeant." "Relax," Hayes said, though his expression remained serious. "This is about your rifle. And before you say anything, this isn't about military regulations. Command has approved your weapon modifications. This is about unit cohesion." Maria felt her stomach tighten. She'd been expecting this conversation for weeks, ever since she'd arrived at the forward operating base with her distinctive equipment. "Sergeant, my weapon meets all performance standards. My marksmanship scores are exceptional," Hayes interrupted. "Among the highest I've seen in 15 years. That's not the issue." He paused, studying her face. "The issue is that half my Marines think you're not taking this deployment seriously. They see that purple rifle and that Christmas decoration, and they think you're treating this like some kind of game." The words hit harder than Maria had expected. She'd spent 3 years in the Marines, earned her expert marksman badge, and completed advanced sniper training with distinction. Yet here she was being questioned not about her abilities, but about her choice to carry reminders of home. "With respect, Sergeant," Maria said carefully, "my personal equipment choices shouldn't affect my ability to do my job." Hayes nodded slowly. "In a perfect world, you'd be right. But we don't live in a perfect world, Santos. We live in a world where these men need to trust you completely. When bullets start flying, they need to know that the person watching their back is someone they can count on. And they can't count on me because my rifle is purple. They can't count on you because they don't understand why your rifle is purple." Hayes stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Look, I've read your file. I know you're here for a reason, and I know you didn't choose that color scheme on a whim. But these boys don't know that. All they see is someone who appears to be making a fashion statement in a war zone." Maria looked down at her rifle, running her thumb along the smooth purple coating. The color wasn't a fashion statement. It wasn't about standing out or making a point. It was about something much deeper, something she hadn't shared with anyone since arriving in Afghanistan. "What do you want me to do, Sergeant?" she asked. "I want you to help them understand," Hayes replied. "Tonight, during evening chow, some of the guys are going to be talking about their gear, swapping stories about modifications and personalizations. I'd like you to join the conversation. Share why that rifle means what it means to you." Maria felt her throat tighten. Sharing meant opening up about things she'd kept buried for years. It meant revealing parts of herself she wasn't sure she was ready to expose to a group of Marines who already questioned her commitment. "I don't know if I'm ready for that, Sergeant." Hayes studied her for a long moment. "Santos, in 6 weeks, we're moving to a forward position near Helmand Province. The intelligence reports suggest we'll be seeing significant action. When that happens, I need every Marine in this unit functioning as part of the team. Right now, you're an outsider. That's not sustainable in combat." The weight of his words settled over her like a heavy blanket. Maria understood the implications. In combat, trust wasn't just important, it was the difference between coming home and coming home in a body bag. If her fellow Marines didn't trust her, if they saw her as a liability or a distraction, it could get people killed. "Understood, Sergeant," she said finally. That afternoon, Maria spent her free time walking the perimeter of the base, thinking about Hayes' words. The Christmas keychain on her gear bag caught the sunlight as she moved, its small silver bells creating a gentle melody that reminded her of childhood mornings and laughter around a tree that always seemed too big for their tiny apartment. She thought about the letter in her footlocker, the one she'd read so many times the creases had worn through the paper. She thought about the promise she'd made and the reason she'd joined the Marines in the first place. Most of all, she thought about whether she was ready to share the truth about why a grown woman carried a Christmas decoration into a war zone and why her rifle was the same shade of purple as a little girl's favorite dress. As evening approached and the call for chow echoed across the base, Maria made her decision. She tucked the letter into her pocket, checked her reflection in her footlocker mirror, and headed toward the mess hall. Tonight, she would tell them about Emma. Tonight, she would explain why some battles are worth fighting even after they're already lost. The mess hall was crowded with Marines unwinding from another day in the heat and dust of Afghanistan. Maria spotted the group Hayes had mentioned, a collection of sergeants and corporals gathered around a corner table, their conversation animated as they discussed weapon modifications and gear preferences. Corporal Mitchell was in the middle of describing his customized grip tape when he noticed Maria approaching. Well, he said with a grin. "Look who's joining the real Marines for dinner. Bring your pretty purple toy with you, Santos." Several Marines laughed, but Maria noticed that Sergeant Hayes, sitting at a nearby table, was watching the interaction carefully. She took a deep breath and pulled out an empty chair. "Actually," she said, settling into the seat, "I thought you might want to hear about why my rifle is purple." The laughter faded as the Marines realized she was serious. Mitchell leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. "This should be interesting." Maria reached into her pocket and pulled out the worn letter, setting it carefully on the table. The paper was soft from handling, and several of the Marines could see that it had been folded and unfolded countless times. 3 years ago, she began, her voice steady despite the emotion building in her chest. "I had a little sister named Emma. She was 7 years old, and she loved 2 things more than anything in the world, Christmas and the color purple." The table fell silent. Even the ambient noise of the mess hall seemed to fade as Maria continued. "Emma had leukemia. She'd been fighting it for 2 years when I enlisted. The doctor said she had maybe 6 months left, but Emma was tough. Tougher than any Marine I've ever met." Maria's voice caught slightly, but she pressed on. "She used to tell me that when she grew up, she wanted to be just like me. She wanted to join the Marines and carry a purple rifle so all the bad guys would know she wasn't afraid of anything." Corporal Mitchell's cocky grin had completely disappeared. Around the table, the Marines sat in uncomfortable silence, beginning to understand that they'd severely misjudged their fellow soldier. "The Christmas keychain was hers too," Maria continued, touching the small decoration on her gear bag. "She gave it to me the day I shipped out for boot camp. She said it would keep me safe and remind me that Christmas was her favorite time of year, because that's when families are supposed to be together." She unfolded the letter carefully, her hands trembling slightly. "This is the last letter she wrote me, 3 weeks before she died. She was so excited because she'd started a fund at her school to buy me a purple rifle. She wanted to surprise me when I came home from deployment. Maria looked around the table, meeting each Marine's eyes. Emma died 2 months before I graduated from sniper school. She never got to see me earn my marksman badge. She never got to give me that purple rifle. She paused, collecting herself. So I had my rifle customized. I painted it purple, and I carried her keychain because every time I look down that scope, every time I take a shot to protect one of you, I remember why I'm here. I'm here because a 7-year-old girl believed that Marines protect the people they love, and she made me promise that I'd never let anyone hurt the innocent if I could stop it. The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity. Finally, Sergeant Hayes approached the table and placed a hand on Maria's shoulder. "Santos," he said quietly, "why didn't you tell us this before?" Maria folded the letter carefully and tucked it back into her pocket. "Because some things are too important to use as excuses. Emma didn't want me to be a Marine, so people would feel sorry for me. She wanted me to be a Marine, so people could count on me." Corporal Mitchell cleared his throat, his earlier bravado completely gone. "Santos, we didn't know." "You couldn't have known," Maria replied. "But now you do. And I hope that means when we head out to Helmand Province, you'll judge me by my actions, not my equipment." As Maria stood to leave, she noticed that the entire mess hall had fallen quiet. Word of her story was already spreading through the ranks, carried by whispered conversations and meaningful looks. By morning, every Marine on the base would know about Emma and the promise that turned a little girl's dream into a soldier's mission. What none of them knew yet was that Maria Santos was about to face the ultimate test of that promise, and that her unconventional rifle was going to save more lives than anyone could have imagined. The weeks following Maria's revelation in the mess hall brought a noticeable shift in the atmosphere around Camp Leatherneck. The jokes about her purple rifle stopped completely, replaced by something more complex, a mixture of respect, curiosity, and perhaps a touch of guilt from those who had been quickest to judge. But respect earned in a mess hall and trust forged in combat were two entirely different things, and Maria knew that the real test was still ahead. Sergeant Hayes had been right about the timeline. 6 weeks after their conversation, orders came down that their unit would be moving to Forward Operating Base Chapman, a smaller outpost much closer to Taliban-controlled territory in Helmand Province. The mission was straightforward on paper: establish a presence in the region, conduct patrols, and provide security for engineering teams working to rebuild infrastructure damaged by years of conflict. In reality, everyone knew they were walking into a hornet's nest. The night before their departure, Maria sat in her bunk, cleaning her rifle with the same methodical precision she'd maintained since basic training. The purple finish had worn slightly in places where her hands gripped the weapon, but the color remained vibrant, almost defiant against the military-issued gear surrounding her. Corporal Mitchell appeared at her bunk, holding 2 cups of coffee. The transformation in his behavior since learning about Emma had been remarkable. Where once he'd been the loudest voice mocking her equipment, he'd become something unexpected, an ally. "Mind if I sit?" he asked, offering her one of the cups. Maria nodded, moving over to make room on the edge of her bunk. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, both lost in thoughts about what the next few months might bring. "Santos," Mitchell said finally, "I need to apologize properly. Not just for the jokes, but for the whole attitude. I was way out of line." "You already apologized, Mitchell. We're good." "No, we're not." He turned to face her directly. "See, I've been thinking about what you said, about Emma wanting you to protect innocent people. The thing is, I realize now that I was making it harder for you to do exactly that." Maria raised an eyebrow, questioningly. When half the unit thinks you're not serious about the mission, when they're focused on your gear instead of your skills, that creates hesitation. And hesitation in combat gets people killed. Mitchell took a sip of his coffee, choosing his words carefully. "I've been reading your training records, talking to guys who served with you at previous postings. Your marksmanship scores aren't just good, they're exceptional. Top 5% of all Marine snipers." "Where are you going with this, Mitchell?" "I'm saying that I was so busy judging you for standing out that I didn't bother to find out why you deserve to stand out. Emma would be proud of what you've become, purple rifle and all." The comment hit deeper than Mitchell probably intended. Maria had spent countless hours wondering what her little sister would think of the Marine she'd become, whether Emma would recognize the scared older sister she'd known in the confident soldier she'd worked so hard to become. "Thank you," she said quietly. "That means more than you know." The next morning, Their convoy of armored vehicles rolled out of Camp Leatherneck as the sun painted the Afghan landscape in shades of gold and amber. Maria rode in the third vehicle, her purple rifle secure beside her, Emma's Christmas keychain jingling softly with each bump in the road. The journey to FOB Chapman would take most of the day, traveling through territory where roadside bombs and ambushes were constant threats. As the convoy wound through narrow mountain passes, Maria found herself studying the faces of her fellow Marines. These were the men she'd be serving alongside for the next several months, the men who would depend on her skills and judgment in life-or-death situations. Some, like Mitchell, had come around completely after learning her story. Others remained skeptical, their body language suggesting they still harbored doubts about the Marine with the unusual equipment. Sergeant Hayes rode in the same vehicle, and Maria noticed him observing her as well. Since their conversation at the armory, he'd been watching her more closely, not with suspicion, but with the careful attention of a leader trying to understand how best to utilize every asset at his disposal. "Santos," he said over the rumble of the engine, "when we get to Chapman, you're going to be our primary designated marksman. The base is positioned on elevated terrain with clear sight lines for several kilometers in all directions. Your role will be critical to our defensive posture." Maria nodded, understanding the weight of the assignment. As the primary designated marksman, she would be responsible for long-range threat identification and elimination. In a forward operating base surrounded by hostile territory, her skills could mean the difference between a successful deployment and a catastrophic loss of life. "Understood, Sergeant. I won't let you down." "I know you won't," Hayes replied, then added more quietly, "but some of the men are still adjusting to the idea of counting on someone they don't fully understand yet. Combat has a way of changing perspectives quickly, but until then, you might face some additional challenges." As if summoned by his words, Private First Class Danny Rodriguez, who'd been listening to their conversation, spoke up from across the vehicle. "Sergeant, with respect, are we really putting our primary overwatch in the hands of someone who treats her weapon like a fashion accessory?" The question hung in the air like smoke from an explosion. Maria felt every eye in the vehicle turn toward her, waiting to see how she would respond. This was the moment Hayes had warned her about, the testing that would continue until she proved herself in ways that went beyond mess hall conversations and training scores. "Rodriguez," Maria said calmly, meeting his challenging stare, "that fashion accessory has a confirmed kill range of 1,200 meters and can put 3 shots in a 2-inch group at 500 meters in crosswinds up to 15 miles per hour. The purple coating is actually a specialized ceramic finish that reduces glare and provides superior protection against sand and moisture compared to standard military finishes." She paused, letting the technical details sink in. "But more importantly, every time I look through that scope, I remember exactly why accuracy matters. When you're counting on me to watch your back, you want someone who never forgets that every shot could save a life or take one. That rifle isn't a fashion statement. It's a promise." Rodriguez looked uncomfortable under her direct gaze, but pressed on. "That's all fine in theory, but how do we know you won't freeze up when things get real? Some people are good at the range and fall apart in actual combat." Before Maria could respond, Mitchell surprised everyone by speaking up. "Because she's already been there, Rodriguez. Check her service record. Santos has been in combat before, and her performance was exemplary." Rodriguez looked confused. "I thought this was her first deployment to Afghanistan." "It is," Hayes interjected, "but Santos served in Iraq before coming here. 12 months in Fallujah, where she accumulated an impressive combat record." He looked at Maria, who nodded her permission for him to continue. 4 confirmed kills, multiple assists, and a Bronze Star for actions during a convoy ambush where her marksmanship skills saved the lives of 6 Marines. The vehicle fell silent except for the rumble of the engine and the occasional crackle of radio chatter from the front seat. Rodriguez stared at Maria with a mixture of surprise and embarrassment, clearly realizing he'd made assumptions about her experience based solely on her appearance. "Why didn't anyone mention this before?" he asked. "Because it wasn't relevant before," Maria replied. "Combat records don't mean much until you're actually in combat. Talk is cheap, Rodriguez. When we get to Chapman, you'll see for yourself whether that purple rifle can do the job it was designed for." The convoy continued through the afternoon, winding deeper into Taliban-controlled territory. As the landscape grew more hostile and the radio chatter more tense, Maria noticed a subtle change in the atmosphere inside their vehicle. The Marines were beginning to pay closer attention to her equipment, not with mockery, but with professional interest. Private Johnson, the youngest member of their squad, worked up the courage to ask about the technical specifications of her rifle modifications. Maria found herself explaining the custom trigger system, the enhanced barrel stabilization, and the specialized ammunition she'd been authorized to carry. What started as one curious question became an impromptu weapons seminar, with even Rodriguez eventually joining the conversation. By the time they reached FOB Chapman as the sun was setting behind the mountains, something had shifted in the dynamics of their group. The purple rifle was no longer a source of division. It had become a topic of professional curiosity and grudging respect. But Maria knew that respect, based on conversations and service records, was still fragile. The real test would come when bullets started flying. FOB Chapman was smaller and more austere than Camp Leatherneck, a collection of reinforced buildings and defensive positions carved into a mountainous ridge that provided commanding views of the valley below. As their convoy pulled through the gates, Maria could see the strategic value of the position. From the elevated firing positions, a skilled marksman could control vast stretches of the approaches to the base. That evening, as the units settled into their new quarters, Sergeant Hayes called Maria to the operations center for a briefing on her specific duties. The Ops Center was a cramped room filled with radio equipment, maps, and intelligence reports that painted a grim picture of the local security situation. "Santos, I want you to understand something about this position," Hayes said, pointing to a detailed topographical map of the surrounding area. "Chapman is strategically important because it controls this valley, but that same position makes us a high-value target. Intelligence suggests that local Taliban forces have been planning an assault on this base for months." He traced his finger along several approach routes marked on the map. "Your primary position will be here." He indicated a fortified tower on the northern edge of the base, with backup positions here and here. "In the event of an attack, you'll be our early warning system and our primary means of stopping threats before they reach the outer perimeter." Maria studied the map carefully, calculating sight lines and potential target ranges. The responsibility was enormous. In a coordinated attack, she might be the only thing standing between the enemy and the inner defensive positions where the majority of their forces would be concentrated. "What's the expected threat level?" she asked. "High and immediate," Hayes replied grimly. "Latest intelligence suggests an attack within the next 2 weeks. Possibly sooner if they think we're still settling in and vulnerable." As if to underscore his point, the distant sound of gunfire echoed through the mountains, followed by the thump of mortar rounds landing somewhere in the valley below. The war was all around them, pressing in from every direction, and Maria realized that her opportunity to prove herself was going to come much sooner than anyone had expected. That night, unable to sleep, Maria climbed to her assigned sniper position and familiarized herself with the fields of fire and potential target areas. The purple rifle felt solid and reassuring in her hands as she practiced acquiring targets and calculating ranges. Through the scope, the moonlit landscape looked peaceful, almost beautiful, but she knew that appearance was deceptive. Somewhere out there in the darkness, enemy forces were planning their assault on FOB Chapman. When that attack came, every Marine on the base would be counting on her purple rifle and the promise she'd made to a 7-year-old girl who believed that Marines protected the innocent. Maria adjusted her grip on the rifle, feeling the familiar weight of Emma's Christmas keychain against her gear. Tomorrow would bring whatever it brought, but tonight she was ready. The laughing had stopped, the doubts were beginning to fade, and soon, very soon, her fellow Marines would understand exactly why some battles are worth fighting with whatever weapon carries you through the darkness. The attack came at dawn on their 4th day at FOB Chapman, just as the first rays of sunlight were painting the Afghan mountains in shades of rose and gold. Maria had been on watch in the North Tower for 2 hours, her purple rifle trained on the approach routes that intelligence had identified as most likely avenues of attack. The Christmas keychain on her gear made soft musical sounds in the early morning breeze, a gentle counterpoint to the tension that had been building for days. The first sign of trouble wasn't gunfire or explosions. It was the sudden silence that fell over the valley below, as if the land itself was holding its breath. Birds that had been calling to each other across the ridges went quiet. The distant sounds of village life, dogs barking, children playing, the occasional rumble of a truck engine simply stopped. Maria keyed her radio. Overwatch to base. We have a significant change in ambient noise levels. Something's not right down there. Sergeant Hayes' voice crackled back immediately. Copy, Overwatch. What's your assessment? Too quiet, Sergeant. In Iraq, this kind of silence usually meant the rest of her sentence was lost in the thunderous roar of an explosion as a rocket-propelled grenade slammed into the eastern wall of the base. Before the echo had faded, the morning air erupted with the chatter of automatic weapons fire and the distinctive whistle of incoming mortar rounds. Contact! Contact! Hayes' voice boomed across the radio. All positions. We are under attack from multiple directions. Santos, I need target acquisition and engagement immediately. Maria's training kicked in, years of practice and preparation crystallizing into pure focused action. Through her scope, she could see muzzle flashes appearing along the ridgeline to the east and movement in the tree line to the north where Taliban fighters were attempting to establish firing positions. I have multiple targets at bearing 045 degrees, range approximately 800 meters, she reported, settling into her firing position. Engaging now. The purple rifle bucked against her shoulder as she fired her first shot. 800 meters away, one of the muzzle flashes went dark. She smoothly worked the bolt action, acquired a second target, and fired again. Another threat eliminated. But this wasn't a single sniper taking potshots at the base. This was a coordinated assault involving dozens of fighters attacking from multiple directions simultaneously. Maria could hear the distinctive sound of RPGs being fired, followed by explosions as they impacted against the base's defensive walls. The Taliban had clearly been planning this assault for months, and they brought everything they had. Santos. Rodriguez's voice came over the radio, strained with tension. We've got movement in the North Valley. Can you see them? Maria swung her rifle toward the north, scanning through the scope. It took her a moment to spot what Rodriguez had seen. A group of fighters working their way up a dry riverbed that would bring them dangerously close to the base's most vulnerable section. I see them, she reported. 6, maybe 7 fighters using the riverbed for concealment. Range is approximately 600 meters and closing. Take them out. Hayes ordered. They're heading for the ammunition storage area. This was the moment Maria had been preparing for since she'd first picked up a rifle. Not just the technical challenge of long-range shooting, but the weight of responsibility that came with being the person her fellow Marines counted on for protection. Through her scope, she could see the Taliban fighters clearly now, moving with military precision as they advanced toward the base. She took a deep breath, let half of it out, and squeezed the trigger. The lead fighter dropped. The others scattered for cover, but Maria was already acquiring her next target. The purple rifle performed flawlessly, each shot finding its mark with a precision that had made her one of the top marksmen in the Marine Corps. But even as she eliminated threats to the north, new dangers were emerging from other directions. The Taliban assault was larger and better coordinated than anyone had expected. Maria could hear Hayes coordinating defensive actions over the radio, his voice calm, but urgent as he directed Marine fire teams to repel attacks on multiple fronts. Overwatch, we need suppressive fire on the eastern ridge. Mitchell's voice crackled over the radio. They've got us pinned down at checkpoint 2. Maria swiveled toward the eastern ridge, where she could see Taliban fighters positioned behind rock formations, pouring automatic weapons fire down onto the Marine positions below. This was a different kind of shooting challenge. Not precision elimination of individual targets, but sustained suppressive fire designed to keep enemy heads down while friendly forces maneuvered. She began working her way along the ridge, methodically engaging each firing position. The purple rifle's distinctive crack echoed across the mountainside as she put round after round into enemy positions. She couldn't see the results of every shot through the chaos and smoke, but the volume of incoming fire from that direction began to decrease noticeably. Outstanding shooting, Santos. Hayes called over the radio. Keep it up. You're making a real difference out there. But Maria barely heard the praise. She was completely focused on her work, moving from target to target with mechanical precision. Each shot was a promise kept to Emma. Each eliminated threat was another step toward keeping her fellow Marines safe. The purple rifle had become an extension of her will, a tool for protecting the innocent just as her little sister had dreamed. The battle raged for what felt like hours, but was probably less than 30 minutes. Gradually, The intensity of enemy fire began to decrease as Taliban fighters realized they were facing more effective resistance than they'd anticipated. Maria's position in the North Tower gave her a commanding view of most of the approaches to the base, and her marksmanship was systematically dismantling their coordinated assault. Overwatch, this is base. Hayes' voice came over the radio. Enemy forces appear to be withdrawing. Can you confirm? Maria scanned the surrounding terrain through her scope, looking for signs of continued enemy activity. The muzzle flashes that had been visible along multiple ridgelines were gone. The movement in the valleys had stopped. Even a mortar fire had ceased. Confirmed, base. I'm not seeing any active enemy positions. They appear to be pulling back to the east. Copy that. Maintain overwatch while we assess damage and casualties. Outstanding work up there, Santos. As the immediate danger passed, Maria became aware of things she'd been too focused to notice during the firefight. Her hands were steady, but her heart was pounding. The Christmas keychain on her gear was still jingling softly in the breeze, a peaceful sound that seemed almost surreal after the violence of the past half hour. Most importantly, she could hear voices calling out across the base, Marines checking on each other, coordinating medical assistance, beginning the process of damage assessment. They were alive. All of them, as far as she could tell. The attack that intelligence had warned might overrun the base had been repelled with what appeared to be minimal casualties on the Marine side. An hour later, after the all-clear had been given and security had been re-established, Sergeant Hayes climbed to Maria's position in the North Tower. He found her still at her post, scanning the surrounding terrain for any signs of renewed enemy activity. Santos, he said, settling down beside her firing position. What's your ammunition count? Fired 37 rounds, she reported without taking her eye from the scope. Confirmed hits on at least 15 targets, probable hits on 6 more. Multiple targets were eliminated from ranges between 400 and 900 meters under combat conditions. Hayes whistled softly. 37 rounds, at least 15 confirmed kills, and you stopped a coordinated assault by an estimated 50 Taliban fighters. That's exceptional shooting by any standard. Maria finally lowered her rifle and turned to face her sergeant. How are the men? Any casualties? 3 wounded, none seriously. Rodriguez took some shrapnel from an RPG blast. Mitchell has a bullet graze on his arm, and Johnson got banged up when he dove for cover behind a barrier. But all 3 will be back to full duty within a week. Hayes paused, studying her face. Santos, without your performance today, this could have been much worse. The Taliban were trying to overrun our position, and your marksmanship broke up their assault before they could establish fire superiority. The words should have felt like vindication, like proof that all the training and preparation had been worthwhile. Instead, Maria found herself thinking about the fighters she'd engaged through her scope. Each one had been someone's son, brother, perhaps father. The purple rifle had performed its function flawlessly, but the weight of that function was something no amount of training could fully prepare someone for. Sergeant, she said quietly, I need to know something. Did the men trust me today? When the shooting started, when everything depended on performance rather than appearances, did they trust the Marine with the purple rifle? Hayes was quiet for a long moment, considering his response carefully. Santos, I'll tell you what happened down there during the firefight. When Rodriguez got hit by shrapnel, the first thing he said wasn't a complaint about being wounded. It was, is Santos okay? We need her up there. When Mitchell was directing fire on the eastern ridge, he kept calling for overwatch to suppress specific targets because he knew you could hit whatever he needed eliminated. He gestured toward the base below, where Marines were already working to repair damage from the attack. And when that riverbed assault almost reached our ammunition storage, every Marine on this base knew that you were the only thing standing between them and a catastrophic explosion. There wasn't a single voice questioning your equipment or your commitment. There was just trust. As if to underscore his point, Rodriguez appeared at the top of the tower stairs, his arm in a sling, but his expression determined. Behind him came Mitchell, sporting a bandage on his forearm, followed by Johnson and several other Marines from their unit. Santos, Rodriguez said, approaching her position, I owe you an apology and a thank you. The apology is for doubting you based on something as stupid as the color of your rifle. The thank you is for saving our asses when it really mattered. Mitchell stepped forward next. That was the finest display of marksmanship I've ever seen in combat. Purple rifle or not, you're exactly the Marine we want watching our backs. One by one, The Marines who had initially mocked her equipment approached to express their gratitude and respect. The transformation was complete. The purple rifle that had once been seen as a sign of unseriousness was now recognized as the tool that had saved their lives. But, for Maria, the most meaningful moment came when young Private Johnson, barely 19 years old and still shaking slightly from his first real combat experience, approached her position. "Santos," he said quietly, "I want you to know that when things got really scary down there, when the RPGs were coming in and I thought we might all die, I looked up at this tower and saw that purple rifle and remembered what you told us about your sister. It made me feel safer knowing that someone who understood what we were fighting for was up here, protecting us." Maria felt her throat tighten with emotion. This was what Emma had envisioned when she dreamed of her big sister becoming a Marine. Not just the technical skills or the physical courage, but the understanding that every shot fired in defense of others carried the weight of love and sacrifice. As the Marines headed back to their duties, Hayes remained at Maria's position for a few more minutes. The Afghan afternoon was peaceful again, the valley below showing no signs of the violence that had erupted at dawn. "Santos," he said finally, "I want you to know that your after-action report is going to reflect exceptional performance under fire. But, more than that, I want you to know that you've earned something that can't be written in any report." "What's that, Sergeant?" "The absolute trust of every Marine on this base. Today proved that when everything is on the line, Maria Santos and her purple rifle are exactly who we want in our corner." As Hayes departed, Maria remained at her post, watching over the approaches to FOB Chapman. The Christmas keychain jingled softly in the afternoon breeze, and for the first time since arriving in Afghanistan, she felt truly integrated into her unit. The battle had been won, but, more importantly, the trust had been earned. Emma would have been proud. 3 weeks after the successful defense of FOB Chapman, Maria found herself in a situation she hadn't anticipated when she'd first picked up that purple rifle. Instead of being the outsider struggling for acceptance, she had become something of a legend among the Marines stationed at the forward operating base. Her marksmanship during the Taliban assault had earned her not just respect, but a reputation that was spreading throughout the entire region. Word of the purple rifle incident had reached other bases, other units, and even the higher command structure. Maria discovered this when Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Webb, the regional intelligence officer, arrived at Chapman for what was officially described as a routine assessment, but felt much more like a personal evaluation. Lieutenant Colonel Webb was a career Marine with 22 years of service and a reputation for being absolutely no-nonsense in her approach to both intelligence gathering and personnel assessment. She arrived on a dusty morning in early November, emerging from a convoy of armored vehicles with the bearing of someone who had seen more combat than most Marines twice her size. Maria first encountered Webb during the evening briefing, where the lieutenant colonel was receiving updates on local Taliban activity and base security posture. When Sergeant Hayes introduced Maria as their primary designated marksman, Webb's attention sharpened noticeably. "Santos," Webb said, studying Maria with intense gray eyes, "I've been reading the after-action reports from the assault 3 weeks ago. Impressive work. But I'm more interested in discussing your unconventional equipment choices." Maria felt her stomach tighten. Just when she thought the questions about her rifle had been settled, here was a senior officer who seemed prepared to revisit the entire issue. "Ma'am, my weapon modifications meet all regulatory standards and have proven effective in combat conditions." "I'm not questioning the effectiveness," Webb replied. "I'm questioning the motivation. In my experience, Marines who make highly visible personal statements with their equipment usually have reasons that go deeper than simple preference." That evening, Webb requested a private meeting with Maria in the base commander's office. As Maria entered the small room, she noticed that Webb had spread out several files across the desk: her service record, training evaluations, and what appeared to be intelligence reports from various sources. "Sit down, Santos," Webb said, gesturing to a chair across from the desk. "I want to discuss your background more thoroughly than the standard briefings allow." Maria settled into the chair, trying to read Webb's expression. The lieutenant colonel's face was professionally neutral, but her eyes suggested she was looking for something specific. "I've read about your sister Emma, and the reasons you carry that Christmas keychain," Webb began. "It's a touching story, and it clearly means a great deal to you. But I'm curious about something that isn't in your official file." Webb pulled out a photograph and placed it on the desk where Maria could see it. The image showed a much younger Maria, perhaps 16 years old, standing beside a hospital bed where a little girl lay connected to various medical devices. But it wasn't Emma in the hospital bed. This photograph was taken at St. Mary's Children's Hospital in Detroit for years before you enlisted in the Marines, Webb said quietly. The girl in the bed is Emma Santos, age 7, during her first round of chemotherapy treatments. But here's what interests me, Santos. According to hospital records, Emma Santos lived. She didn't die of leukemia. Maria felt the world tilt around her, as if someone had pulled the ground out from under her feet. The photograph was one she remembered clearly. It had been taken during one of Emma's worst periods, when the doctors thought they might lose her. But Emma had pulled through. Emma had beaten the cancer. Emma was alive. I don't understand, Maria said, her voice barely above a whisper. Webb pulled out another document. Emma Santos, now 11 years old, living in Detroit with your parents. Healthy, cancer-free for 3 years, and, according to school records, an excellent student with a particular interest in science and mathematics. The words hit Maria like physical blows. Emma was alive. Emma was healthy. Emma was growing up and going to school and living the normal life that every 7-year-old deserves, but so few actually get to experience. Then why? Maria began, then stopped, unable to finish the question. Webb leaned forward, her expression softening slightly. That's exactly what I came here to find out. You've been telling everyone that your sister died of cancer, that you carry that purple rifle and Christmas keychain in her memory. But Emma Santos is alive, and, well, so who are you really honoring with that equipment? Maria stared at the photograph, memories flooding back with overwhelming intensity. Emma in the hospital, pale and weak, but still smiling. Emma losing her hair during chemotherapy, but insisting on wearing purple ribbons around her head. Emma making her promise to become strong enough to protect other children from the scary things in the world. She did almost die, Maria said finally. When she was 7, the doctors said she had maybe 6 months. They said the cancer was too advanced, too aggressive. But Emma was tougher than anyone expected. And Webb prompted gently. Maria took a shaky breath. During her treatment, she met another little girl. Same age, same type of cancer, but this girl didn't have family visiting every day. Her parents had been killed in a car accident, and she was in the foster care system. Her name was Sophie Martinez. Webb consulted another file. Sophie Martinez, age 7, admitted to St. Mary's Children's Hospital with acute lymphoblastic leukemia. No immediate family, placed in temporary foster care with the Henderson family. Emma and Sophie became inseparable. Maria continued, her voice growing stronger as she found the words to tell a story she'd never shared with anyone. They were roommates for months, going through treatment together. Sophie was scared and alone most of the time, but Emma took care of her. Emma shared her toys, her books, her visitors. She made sure Sophie never felt abandoned. Maria paused, collecting herself. Sophie loved 2 things more than anything else in the world. She loved Christmas because it was the only time of year she remembered being truly happy with her parents. And she loved the color purple because Emma told her it was the color of courage. Webb remained silent, allowing Maria to tell the story at her own pace. When Emma started responding to treatment, and it became clear she was going to beat the cancer, she made me promise something. She said that Sophie was going to die. The doctors had already told them that Sophie's cancer wasn't responding to treatment the way Emma's was. Emma made me promise that when Sophie died, I would carry something purple and something Christmas-related to remember her. Maria's voice broke slightly. She said that Sophie deserved to have someone remember that she was brave, that she fought as hard as any soldier, and that she never stopped believing in Christmas magic even when everything else in her life was falling apart. And Sophie did die, Webb said softly, 3 weeks before Emma was discharged from the hospital. She was 7 years old, and she died alone except for Emma holding her hand. Maria looked directly at Webb. Emma couldn't stop crying for days. She kept saying it wasn't fair that she got to live, and Sophie didn't, that Sophie deserved to see Christmas one more time. Webb nodded slowly, understanding beginning to dawn in her expression. So when you enlisted in the Marines, you weren't honoring your living sister. You were honoring a little girl who died alone in a hospital bed. Emma gave me Sophie's Christmas keychain, the only thing Sophie had from her parents. And when I had my rifle customized, I chose purple because Sophie used to say that purple was the color brave people wore when they weren't afraid of anything. Maria wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. I tell people the story is about Emma because Emma is still alive and she deserves privacy. But every time I look through that scope, I remember a 7-year-old girl who fought cancer with more courage than most adults show in their entire lives. Webb leaned back in her chair, processing everything Maria had revealed. Why didn't you tell this story to your unit? Why create a fiction about Emma's death? Because Sophie's story isn't mine to tell. She was a foster child who died alone. She doesn't have family to honor her memory or speak for her. The only people who remember her are Emma and me, and Emma was just a child when it happened. Maria's voice grew firm. Sophie Martinez deserves to be remembered as more than just a sad story told to explain why someone carries unusual equipment. She deserves to be remembered as a little girl who taught everyone around her what real courage looks like. Webb was quiet for several long minutes, studying the files spread across the desk. Finally, she spoke. Santos, I came here because your story didn't add up. Frankly, I suspected you might be falsifying your background for some kind of personal gain or attention. What I found instead is something much more complex. She gathered the documents and photographs back into their folders. You've been carrying the memory of a child who had no one else to carry it. You've been honoring a promise made by your sister to ensure that someone who died alone wouldn't be forgotten. And you've been doing it while maintaining the privacy of everyone involved, including your living sister. Webb stood up, her demeanor shifting back to official mode. Santos, what you've told me tonight doesn't change anything about your service record or your performance as a Marine. If anything, it reinforces my confidence in your character and judgment. But I want you to understand something important. Yes, ma'am. Sophie Martinez may not have had family to remember her, but she had something equally important. She had a friend who loved her enough to carry her memory into combat, to honor her courage in the most dangerous situations imaginable. That's not a small thing, Santos. That's the kind of love that changes the world. As Webb prepared to leave, she paused at the door. One more thing. Your unit doesn't need to know the details, but they should know this. That purple rifle isn't just a personal memorial. It's a promise to protect children who can't protect themselves. And that makes you exactly the kind of Marine the Corps needs. After Webb left, Maria sat alone in the commander's office, staring at her hands. For 3 years, she'd carried Sophie's memory without ever speaking the little girl's name aloud. Tonight, for the first time, she'd shared the complete truth about why she fought, why she served, and why she carried reminders of Christmas and courage into the most dangerous places in the world. Outside, the Afghan night was quiet except for the routine sounds of base security, guards walking their posts, radio chatter from the operations center, the distant hum of generators providing power to essential systems. But inside the office, Maria felt something she hadn't experienced since Emma had given her Sophie's keychain years ago. She felt understood. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new threats, new opportunities to prove that Sophie Martinez's courage lived on in the actions of a Marine who had learned that sometimes the most important battles are fought in memory of those who never got the chance to fight for themselves. The purple rifle would continue to serve its purpose, but now Maria knew that its true power came not from its technical specifications or combat effectiveness. Its true power came from the love of a 7-year-old girl who had taught everyone around her that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's doing what's right even when you're afraid, even when you're alone, even when no one else will remember your name. 8 months after arriving at FOB Chapman, Maria found herself preparing for something she'd barely allowed herself to imagine during the darkest days of deployment: going home. The official orders had come through 2 weeks earlier, but it wasn't until she was actually packing her gear that the reality began to sink in. She was leaving Afghanistan, leaving the Marines who had become her brothers, and leaving the purple rifle that had defined so much of her military experience. The base armorer, Staff Sergeant Martinez, had approached her about the rifle 3 days before departure. Standard procedure required that all customized weapons be restored to military specifications before return to the armory, which meant the purple coating would have to be removed and replaced with standard military finish. Santos, Martinez had said, clearly uncomfortable with the conversation, I know what that rifle means to you, but regulations are regulations. I can strip the custom coating and have it ready for turn-in by Thursday. Maria had stared at the purple weapon for a long moment, thinking about everything it represented. Sophie's courage, Emma's love, her own journey from outsider to trusted team member. The idea of watching it transform back into just another standard issue rifle felt like erasing something sacred. Actually, Sergeant, she'd replied, I'd like to purchase the rifle through the civilian marksmanship program. I'll submit the paperwork for transfer of ownership. Martinez had raised his eyebrows. You want to take it home? Keep it purple. I want to keep my promise, Maria had said simply. Now, as she carefully wrapped the rifle in a protective case for transport, she reflected on how much had changed since that first day when Marines had mocked her unusual equipment. The purple finish had worn in places where her hands had gripped the weapon, and there was a small scratch on the stock from a piece of shrapnel during a firefight in January. But the color remained vibrant, defiant, a visual reminder of commitments that went deeper than military service. Sergeant Hayes knocked on the doorframe of her quarters. Santos, you ready for the farewell ceremony? The ceremony was a Chapman tradition, a brief gathering where departing Marines were recognized for their service and contributions to the unit. Maria had attended several such ceremonies for other Marines, but she'd never been the focus of one. As ready as I'll ever be, Sergeant. The ceremony took place on the main parade ground, with most of the base personnel in attendance. Maria stood at attention as Hayes read the official commendation that would be added to her service record. The words were formal, military, focused on technical achievements and successful mission completion. But when Hayes finished the official remarks, he set aside his prepared text and spoke from the heart. Marines, he said, addressing the assembled crowd. Maria Santos came to Chapman carrying equipment that some of you questioned. She left Chapman carrying the absolute respect and trust of every person on this base. Her performance under fire saved lives, her dedication to her mission never wavered, and her character proved that sometimes the most important things about a Marine can't be determined by looking at their gear. He turned to face Maria directly. Santos, you've served with honor and distinction. But more than that, you've shown us that being a Marine isn't about fitting in with everyone else's expectations. It's about being true to your principles and using your skills to protect the people who count on you. The assembled Marines applauded, but Maria barely heard it. Her attention was focused on the faces in the crowd. Rodriguez, who had gone from mocking her equipment to defending her choices. Mitchell, who had become one of her closest friends. Young Johnson, who had grown from a frightened teenager into a confident Marine partly because he'd learned that courage could wear any color. After the ceremony, the Marines lined up to say their personal goodbyes. Each had something different to offer. Handshakes, jokes, promises to stay in touch, memories of shared experiences that had forged bonds stronger than family. But it was Private Johnson who surprised her the most. The young Marine approached, carrying a small package wrapped in brown paper. Santos, he said, unusually formal. I wanted to give you something before you left. Maria unwrapped the package to find a small wooden plaque with an inscription burned into the surface. In memory of Sophie Martinez, age 7, who taught us that courage comes in all colors. Johnson, she said, her voice catching, how did you? Lieutenant Colonel Webb told us about Sophie after you left for processing, Johnson explained. She said you've been carrying that little girl's memory all this time, and that we should understand what your rifle really represented. We all chipped in to have this made. Maria turned the plaque over and found additional text on the back, presented to Staff Sergeant Maria Santos by the Marines of FOB Chapman. You kept your promise. For a moment, Maria couldn't speak. The fact that her fellow Marines knew the truth about Sophie and chose to honor both her memory and Maria's commitment to keep it move her more deeply than any official commendation could have. Thank you, she managed finally. All of you. This means everything. The flight home seemed both endless and too short. Maria spent most of the journey staring out the aircraft window, watching the landscape change from the harsh mountains of Afghanistan to the green fields of Germany to the familiar cities of the American East Coast. With each mile, the war felt more distant, but the memories remained vivid. She thought about Sophie Martinez, the little girl she'd never met but whose courage had inspired her through the darkest moments of deployment. She thought about Emma, now 11 years old, and probably wondering what her big sister had been doing for the past year. Most of all, she thought about the promise she'd made and how it had shaped not just her military service, but her understanding of what it meant to fight for something bigger than yourself. The homecoming at Quantico was a blur of paperwork, medical examinations, and debriefings. But the moment that mattered most came 2 days later, when Maria finally had leave time and could make the drive to Detroit to see her family. Emma was waiting on the front porch when Maria pulled into the driveway. At 11, she was tall for her age, healthy, and vibrant, with the same bright eyes that Maria remembered from their childhood. But there was something different about her, a maturity that suggested she understood more about Maria's service than their parents might have shared. "Maria," Emma called, running down the front steps and throwing her arms around her sister. "I missed you so much. Did you bring your purple rifle?" Maria laughed, surprised by the question. "How did you know about the rifle?" "Mom showed me the news stories about you. There was an article in the Detroit Free Press about the Marine from Michigan who became famous for her purple sniper rifle. They talked about how you saved your whole base from an attack." Emma stepped back, studying Maria's face with serious eyes. "But they got the story wrong, didn't they? It wasn't really about me." Maria knelt down to Emma's level, amazed by her sister's perceptiveness. "What makes you say that?" "Because I remember Sophie. I remember what I asked you to promise." Emma's voice dropped to a whisper. "I remember how brave she was, even when she was scared. And I remember giving you a keychain so you could carry part of her with you, wherever you went." Maria felt tears beginning to form. "Emma, I'm proud of you," Emma interrupted. "I'm proud that you kept your promise to remember Sophie. And I'm proud that you used her memory to help you protect other people. That's what she would have wanted." That evening, Maria sat in her childhood bedroom, surrounded by boxes of military gear and mementos from her deployment. The purple rifle was secure in its case, waiting to be properly stored, but the Christmas keychain that had belonged to Sophie Martinez sat on the dresser, where Maria could see it clearly. Her mother knocked softly on the door. "Maria, there's someone here to see you." Downstairs, Maria found Lieutenant Colonel Webb waiting in the living room, dressed in civilian clothes, but still carrying herself with unmistakable military bearing. "Santos," Webb said, standing as Maria entered the room. "I hope you don't mind me stopping by. I was in the area for a family visit, and I wanted to follow up on our conversation at Chapman." "Of course not, ma'am. Can I get you anything?" Webb shook her head. "Actually, I came to give you something." She handed Maria a manila envelope. "Open it." Inside the envelope was a photograph, a professional military portrait of Maria in full dress uniform, holding the purple rifle. But it wasn't the image itself that took Maria's breath away. It was the inscription at the bottom: "Staff Sergeant Maria Santos, United States Marine Corps, in honor of Sophie Martinez and all the children who teach us what courage looks like." "This photograph is going into the Women's Military Museum at the Pentagon," Webb explained. "Your story, the real story, including Sophie's name, is going to be part of an exhibit about Marines who serve for reasons that go beyond personal ambition or career advancement." Maria stared at the photograph, hardly believing what she was hearing. "Ma'am, I never intended for this to become public knowledge." "That's exactly why it should be public knowledge," Webb replied. "Santos, during your deployment, you proved something important. You proved that the most effective warriors aren't necessarily the ones who look the most military or conform most closely to expectations. Sometimes they're the ones who understand that true strength comes from love, memory, and promises kept to people who can't speak for themselves." Webb stood to leave, but paused at the front door. "One more thing, Santos. I've been authorized to offer you an opportunity to return to active duty as an instructor at the Marine Corps Scout Sniper School. Your experience with unconventional equipment and your proven performance under fire make you an ideal candidate to train the next generation of Marine marksmen." Maria felt her pulse quicken. The opportunity was extraordinary, a chance to shape how the Marines train their most elite shooters, to pass on lessons learned not just from technical expertise, but from understanding the deeper purpose behind military service. "I'd like some time to consider the offer," Maria said. "Take all the time you need. But remember, there are probably other Marines out there right now who are struggling with questions about whether they fit in, whether their personal motivations align with military expectations. They could benefit from an instructor who understands that being different isn't a weakness." After Webb left, Maria sat on the front porch with Emma, watching the sun set over their quiet Detroit neighborhood. The purple rifle was inside, secure in its case, but its lessons remained vivid in Maria's memory. "Are you going back?" Emma asked quietly. Maria considered the question. Going back to active duty would mean leaving home again, but It would also mean the opportunity to teach other Marines that effectiveness comes in many forms, that the most important battles are often fought for people who can't fight for themselves, and that sometimes keeping a promise to a child is the most military thing you can do. I think so, Maria replied. I think Sophie would want me to help other people understand what we learned from her. Emma nodded solemnly. She would be proud of you, both for what you did over there and for what you're going to do when you go back. As night fell over Detroit, Maria Santos sat on her childhood porch, a decorated Marine veteran preparing for the next phase of her service. In her pocket was Sophie Martinez's Christmas keychain, still jingling softly in the evening breeze. In her memory were the faces of Marines who had learned that trust isn't built on conformity, but on competence, character, and commitment to something greater than individual ambition. The purple rifle had served its purpose in Afghanistan, but its real mission was just beginning. There were other Marines who needed to understand that courage comes in all colors, that the most important promises are the ones we make to people who can't ask for them, and that sometimes the smallest details, a colored rifle, a childhood tournament, carry the biggest truths about who we are and why we fight. Sophie Martinez had died alone in a hospital bed at age 7, but her courage would live on in every Marine who learned that being different isn't about standing out. It's about standing up for what matters most, regardless of what anyone else thinks about how you choose to do it.